And the thing that really infuriates Trump is that every other institution of American life that he's encountered, when there's a conflict between his demands and their own beliefs and principles, that all of these other institutions, whether it's corporate America, law firms, certainly Republican politicians, have capitulated to his demands. These judges are not, and they're showing no sign that they are going to. And that's infuriating to him. It's also, I think, baffling to him. He's baffled.
Hello, listeners. I'm Clarissa Moll. Welcome to the show. Joining me at the mics today are senior commentator Russell Moore. Hey, Russell.
Hey, Clarissa.
Senior commentator Mike Cosper. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Clarissa.
And New York Times columnist David French. Hey, David. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So it's no secret that President Trump isn't a big fan of the courts in the U.S. He's tangled with them since before he was president and endured long proceedings to determine whether he mishandled classified documents, engaged in business fraud, and attempted to overturn the 2020 election. This past week, another court rejected Mr. Trump's appeal for more power over tariffs. David, can you explain to me exactly what happened this week?
Yeah, so what has happened is kind of this back and forth where you had an International Court of Trade that declared the Liberation Day tariffs. These were the big, sweeping, trade deficit-based tariffs, and everything sort of that has permeated from that, that these big, sweeping global tariffs were violated the law. This also was the finding of a district court. So you had an International Court of Trade court saying they violated the law. You had a district court saying they violated the law. Now, this is, of course, being appealed, and the Federal Circuit has administratively stayed the enforcement of the International Court of Trade opinion while it considers the appeal. So the bottom line is that he still has the tariffs are still in effect. However, he's now battling not one but two court orders that, if ultimately affirmed, would end his tariff regime. Now, if you are, let's say you're listening and you're a Trump supporter and you're saying, well, look what the courts are doing here. They're overriding the democratic process. Well, what's actually happening is, so far, these courts are extending precedents that were set in the Biden administration. So if you go back to the Biden administration, there were two big sweeping presidential directives that were struck down by the Supreme Court. The vaccine mandate in the OSHA context and his big blanket student loan forgiveness. And they were struck down in part because he was extrapolating huge extra authority from statutes that were enacted for different purposes. And that's very similar to what the courts were basically saying here, is that President Trump was pulling from IEPA, the statute that is at issue here, just huge sweeping authority over tariffs and taxes that's not given to him by the statute. And so it's a very similar kind of reasoning, very similar kind of process going on. Of course, because it's tariffs and not student loans, or tariffs and not vaccine mandates, there's going to be other factual differences, and we don't know how the Supreme Court will ultimately rule. But if it does uphold this ban on the tariffs, it will do it for reasons that are very much related to the reasons that it rejected sweeping Biden administration actions.
Trump took aim at a particular gentleman, Mr. Leonard Leo, on Truth Social. Why be so mean to him?
Well, they have not. So with this, there's a tangled little backstory here. So you have Leonard Leo, who's one of the leaders of the Federalist Society, key leader of the Federalist Society, who really helped the first Trump administration staff the judiciary. Trump, who had a lot of credibility problems with ideological conservatives early on in his run for the presidency. Boy, that's a blast from the past, saying Trump had problems with conservatives. Anyway, so Trump had problems with conservatives for a very brief time, and these lists of judges there were lists of judges that were put out. They were stocked with these Federalist Society judges. And then when Trump becomes president, Leonard Leo helps him throughout his presidency select good judges. And to this day, I think one of the best elements of the first Trump term are the judges that he picked. There's a lot of judges. I'm friends with many of them who are just outstanding people, outstanding judges. Well, in 2020, the Federalist Society and the Trump judges didn't really go along with Trump's effort to steal the election. And saying they didn't really go along is an understatement. While there were some Federalist Society folks who helped Trump, the vast majority of the Federalist Society either opposed Trump or stayed out of it. And the Federalist Society judges, all of them rejected Trump's arguments. So even some of Trump's own appointees rejected his arguments. And so there's been this like slow unfolding breakup. And then I think it's just exploded out into the open with the realization that his own appointed judges are not helping him now in his second term. As of right now, Democratic appointed judges have ruled against Trump about 80% of the time in this second term. Republican appointed judges have ruled against Trump about 72% of the time. So there's very little difference there, and Trump is getting furious. And rather than just sort of stepping back and saying, maybe I should enact lawful policies, he's lashing out. He's lashing out at the judiciary.
Russell, why are the judges responding this way?
Well, it's not because they're Federalist Society judges. It's because they're judges. And so what you see happening is the kind of response you would expect from people who are trying to look at what does the Constitution say, what do the actual statutes themselves say, what is the rule of law. And that's the key difference here, is whether or not there's loyalty to one person's shifting agenda and shifting plans, or the actual written text of the law. And these are judges who have been saying for all of their careers, we don't want judges who simply are deciding, well, what do we think is the best policy? And then doing that, we want judges who are interpreting the law itself. And we're just in a very different time now where everything is couched in terms of personal loyalty to a figure. That's very different than where we've ever been in American life.
Mike, I see you smiling. Weigh in.
Well, no, I think that the idea that judges are making independent judgments, it's the most common sense thing in the universe for anybody who's paid attention to American politics since high school. But what we have on the right now is we have this idea of, I had a conversation at the beginning of this presidential term, right? I went to DC in January. I sat down with somebody who was very, very pro-Trump, very supportive of the agenda and all that. And one of the things that they said when we sat down and talked, they said, you're going to see an aggressive push for executive authority in all of this. And my jaw was on the floor, and it's not on the floor now because I've read Project 2025 and I've read the books about Project 2025 and I understand what they're trying to accomplish with the presidency. But the reason my jaw was on the floor is because that is not something that, the conservative movement would ever have gotten behind before this term, before this presidency, before Donald Trump. There's something bizarre about the idea that quote unquote conservatives, and I would love to gatekeep that term a little more closely than we have in the last 10 years, but that's probably a lost cause at this point. The idea that conservatives are pushing for the expansion of executive authority, where an individual possesses the ability to transform in an extraordinary way our policies as a country, that's just bizarre to me. And I don't know, I can't get over that.
It's also the shifting goalposts. I mean, what we have been told, those of us who haven't been Trump supporters, is, well, you have to support him because judges, good pro-life, pro-religious liberty judges. And now we're told, well, you have to hate the judges because of Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't make sense.
Well, and also there's going to be some ripple effects here because Trump appointed a lot of judges his first term. A lot of judges. And he was so efficient at appointing judges that there is a lot of speculation, informed speculation, that he was going to have fewer judges to appoint this time around. And there was just going to be fewer vacancies because presidents from both parties have been picking younger and younger judges who can stay longer and longer at the bench. And so, but he was already going to be facing fewer picks. How many people, especially some of these older Reagan or Bush appointees, are going to say, you know what, I want this version of Donald Trump picking my replacement? So he may end up actually undermining his own ability to impact the judiciary, because Republican appointed judges and maybe even Republican appointed justices won't step down because they're afraid of who's going to replace him. And they have some reason to be afraid, because there was this recent appointment to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals of Emil Beauvais, who is a name you might remember from the very opening days of this Trump term, when he engineered the dismissal of the criminal charges against Eric Adams, which was extremely controversial, resulted in the resignation of multiple people in the Southern District of New York. And Beauvais was the one just pushing the Trump agenda. And if that's the kind of person that Trump's going to be appointing, then this could be a very different second term, and you might see a very different level of judicial retirements.
Mike, if judges can stand up to President Trump, why can't the Congress? What's the difference between a judicial conservative, shall we say, and a House or Senate Republican?
Primary elections. I mean, that's the main thing that distinguishes the secure conscience of a judge on the bench who's appointed for life, and a member of the House or a member of the Senate who could be primaried by, I mean, the reality is that in the Trump era, if you go against Trump, you will end up running a primary campaign against a reality TV C-list celebrity that Trump endorses, and will take you out. It will take you out of your seat. So I think that's the main thing to recognize, is that Trump's hold on the right is about his power as a celebrity, his power as frankly as a cult of personality on the right now, and the way that it constrains any Republican from standing up against him who has to face another election. They know that his base will come out to vote against them if he asks them to. So they're all terrified of what would happen in a primary campaign.
Well, we've watched the Oval Office defy the Supreme Court. And Russell, I'm wondering, how do you walk back from that? And I'm not talking about the government so much as the common American. I mean, it does seem like a do as I say, not as I do. Are we increasing a community sense of defiance by watching our chief leader say, no, the law doesn't apply to me?
Well, so far we've seen kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod type of defiance. We haven't seen an outright, we're going to defy the ruling of the Supreme Court. So it's well, we can't control what El Salvador does. Wink, wink, nod, nod. That kind of rhetoric, which most people don't really see, get, or understand. But the pattern is there, and the mentality keeps edging out the Overton window. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you get to the point where there's not a lawful authority, you end up with Book of Judges. Everybody does what's right in his own eyes, and that's the very kind of chaos that the American founders tried to restrain with the system that we now have. And just like everything else, that it's really easy to tear that down. It's hard, impossible to build that back up. So that's the precarious nature of where we are right now. And then if you add to that people having a sense of desperation, where they think we don't have lawful means to try to adjudicate our differences, that opens up a really, really dark sort of calling out to the most fallen aspects of human nature. And we've already seen a little bit of this starting to happen with people saying, well, I mean, what are you supposed to do about health insurance companies and so forth? Making this moral kind of anarchist sort of argument. That only takes more and more fuel the more that you tear down the rule of law.
Yeah, David, I asked that because Greg Rosen, the federal prosecutor who helped lead the January 6th case, resigned this week from the DOJ. And I'm wondering what the downstream consequences are for that when we know that President Trump is reviewing a lot of pardons right now from the Biden administration, and he's also dishing out some pardons of his own.
Yeah, I mean, look, we know what the pattern is now. The pattern was set in the opening 48 hours of the Trump administration, and that was for my friends, everything. From my enemies, the law. And if anyone is in my way in the administration, I'm going to fire them, whether I have the lawful authority to fire them or not. And this has been sort of the pattern going forward. And so the pardons, we're going to see, and we have seen, and we're going to see more pardons throughout the Trump term where it's just friends of Trump or people who have cozied up to Trump or have maybe donated to Trump. I mean, this is what we'll see the whole time. And we're going back into sort of a first-term pattern where it feels like the next scandal is crowding out the last scandal. And so what's happening is you're just forgetting all that's come before because you're focusing on the 9-alarm fire that's right in front of you. And then 3 days from now, there will be another 9-alarm fire, but we won't have resolved the 17 that came before it. And this is just how he operates, and this is sort of how he overwhelms the opposition. And to add to, what Mike was saying about why are judges more able to resist, I think that the fact that there's no primary is very, 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 they have life tenure. There's also this culture of independence. Where is it that a judge gets his or her sort of historical esteem and legacy? It is not from the applause of the crowd. It is from the weight of his or her precedent that they decided. So it's a very, very different culture. And I think also one of the reasons why the judges have been successful so far in sort of resisting the social pressure is unlike members of Congress who are dealing with everything all at once, just the way we all are watching it from the sidelines, is that the judges are dealing with one or two things at a time. And they can narrowcast and they can focus. And no one judge or until it gets to the Supreme Court, no one set of judges is dealing with everything. And the Supreme Court has the ability to winnow things down and filter things down. And so I think it's also sort of the structure of the thing that each of these judges has their own sort of slice of the constitutional pie that they're looking at. Members of Congress are just are facing that tsunami. And that's the last sympathetic thing you'll hear from me about members of Congress, because otherwise, I think these guys have, utterly, utterly, utterly failing at their jobs. But I do recognize that everything is always hitting them all at once.
Mike, when I think about what's going on with the courts, my mind immediately goes to immigration. And what happened this week in Boulder seems like yet another opportunity for folks to say, well, see, this is why the president is defying court orders, because of what can happen when we allow people to be here illegally.
That's the reason that argument is absurd is because there are laws on the books that should have led to this individual in Boulder who, for more than a year has plotted an attack against Jews. He attempted to buy a gun illegally. His online activity clearly indicated where he was going, what he wanted to do. The laws on the books were enough to get this guy kicked out of our country. And so there's no reason for us to say, well, in the light of these anti-Semitic attacks, we need a much more sort of muscular, even lawless, we need to suspend habeas corpus in order to get these people out of the country. No, we just need to enforce the laws that are on the books. And when somebody flags our system because they're trying to buy a gun illegally, or when somebody flags our system because they are engaging in terroristic rhetoric online, or they're searching for how do I make bombs that will blow up, elderly Jews who are marching on behalf of Jewish hostages in Gaza, that's the kind of thing that should flag the FBI, flag whoever else is watching us online in our search activities, and get these people out of our country, or get these people into custody when they're planning something that is evil. We don't need lawlessness to fight lawlessness. We need enforcement of the laws that are already on the books.
There was this viral exchange between Kate Shaw, who's a law professor and podcaster, legal podcaster, a friend of mine, I know her a little bit, and Josh Hawley, where Josh Hawley had this this graph, this chart of all of the injunctions granted against Trump. And he was like, isn't there something wrong here? And her response was perfect, which was maybe the president, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the exact exchange in front of me, but maybe the president should consider promulgating fewer unconstitutional policies. Because again, this is not a graph of just Democratic judges and justices. It's Republican nominated judges and justices who are doing the same thing. And the thing that really infuriates Trump is that every other institution of American life that he's encountered, when there's a conflict between his demands and their own beliefs and principles, all of these other institutions, whether it's corporate America, law firms, certainly Republican politicians, have capitulated to his demands. These judges are not, and they're showing no sign that they are going to. And that's infuriating to him. It's also, I think, baffling to him. He's baffled.
And the judges, it's not just that they have a longer view looking backward in terms of what's the Constitution and what's the law. They also have a longer view looking forward that members of Congress should have as well, to say, even if we just sort of suspend our commitment to the Constitution, what power are we giving to a future president to use in whatever way he or she wants to? The judges seem to recognize where that stuff goes in the way that members of Congress just don't.
David, I wonder as we close, if there's a moment in judiciary history that kind of anchors you in hope as you watch what's playing out now. Something where you say, I know things can go terribly wrong. They're going wrong now. But this one time, this thing went right. And maybe if we could do this again.
Yeah, there's one that comes to my mind. It's both positive and negative, though. So it's positive about the judiciary. It's negative about the political branches. And that's Brown v. Board of Education. Brown v. Board in 1954, the Supreme Court knew there was going to be resistance to its ruling. It knew that its ruling was going to face an enormous political backlash. And it did it anyway. It ruled anyway. And then it followed up a year later with Brown 2. It's like, we really do mean it. You have to desegregate. With all deliberate speed, you have to desegregate. And now it knew it couldn't deploy troops. It knew it couldn't force the issue itself. But rather than finesse it, rather than sort of back away, rather than reach yet another one of these racist compromises like Plessy, separate but equal, it plunged in and did the right thing. And yes, it took a long time for that ruling to be enforced. It took way too long. But aren't we thankful? Aren't we glad that we have that decision sitting in American history, finally codifying, ratifying, affirming the commitments of the 14th Amendment to equal protection? And so I think that if the court is looking at everything with this short-term lens, how can I finesse this situation to avoid a conflict? They're thinking through the wrong way. They need to think, how do I interpret the Constitution to squarely address the issue? And if the political branches fail, they fail. But we have to do our job.
Yeah.
Russell, what can I do to develop the sort of character traits that lead to those kind of decisions? Because I can't do anything about the courts, but surely there is some spiritual formation that could lead to better results.
Well, I think one of those things is to line up the inner and the outer, to line up what it is that you actually think and believe from what it is that you say and do. Meaning that there's a category that is above simply who is my group, who is my group leader. What do I do in order to be still part of this group? To say, no, there are things that are right and that are wrong. And when it comes to this kind of thing, to say, what is the rule of law that I swore to uphold? And as best as I can, I'm going to figure out what that is, even if I have a lot of pressure on me to do that. Most people don't have to do that in a judicial setting, but everybody has to do that in terms of their own lives, whether or not you, Romans 12:1, conform to the pattern of the world around you, or by the renewing of your mind, be consistently transformed. Everybody faces that every day of their lives.
Listen to the full episode wherever podcasts are found.